Let us continue with the chapter 4, Logical Methods of Indirect Method. I want to remind you the various logical techniques. These are formal proof of validity, second the rule of replacement, third proof of invalidity, fourth inconsistency, fifth indirect proof of validity, and sixth shorter truth table technique. In earlier lecture, we were discussing these 1 to 4 of 9 rules of inference, means from first to 4. First, modus ponens, modus tollens, third, hypothetical syllogism, then disjunction syllogism. Now, fifth rule. Fifth rule is constructive dilemma. It is a valid rule of inference in propositional logic. It allows us to combine two conditional statements and a disjunction, means an either or statement, to reach a logical conclusion. Here, first condition is if A is true, then B is true. Second condition is if C is true, then D is true. Third condition is either A is true or C is true. So conclusion, therefore, either B is true or D is true. Let us take an example of miasmatic prescription. First condition, if A is true, then B is true. If the patient's underlying chronic state is primarily psoric, that is characterized by functional disturbances, anxiety and itching, then the deep acting constitutional remedy is sulfur. Second condition, if C is true, then D is true. If the patient's underlying chronic state is primarily psychotic, that is characterized by overgrowths, fixed ideas and secretive behavior, then the deep acting constitutional remedy is thuja occidentalis. Third condition, either A is true or C is true. Upon detailed case taking, this patient's totality of symptoms clearly indicates that they are either a psoric or a psychotic constitution, keeping in mind that their miasm is not tubercular or syphilitic. So conclusion, therefore either B is true or D is true. Therefore, the most suitable deep acting constitutional prescription for this patient is either sulfur or thuja occidentalis. Let us take an example of prescription based on modalities. First condition, if the patient's acute knee pain is distinctly worsened by cold applications and relieved by warm compresses, then the indicated acute remedy is Rustox. Second condition, if the patient's acute knee pain is distinctly worsened by heat applications and relieved by cold compresses, then the indicated acute remedy is Pulsatilla nigricans. Third condition, either A is true or C is true, means during the physical examination and reportization, the patient's pain modalities are clearly polarized. They are either marked better by warmth or markedly better by cold. There is no ambivalence. So conclusion will be, therefore, either B is true or D is true. Therefore, the single homeopathic remedy to administer immediately for this acute pain is either Rustox or Pulsatilla nigricans. Now, sixth rule. Sixth rule is absorption. Here, the condition is if A is true, then B is true. And the conclusion is if A is true, then both A and B is true. Let us take an example of a keynote prescription. The condition is if a patient presents with a characteristic keynote symptom of intense anxiety about their disease, worse at night, then this indicates the remedy arsenic album. Then the conclusion is, therefore, if a patient presents with intense anxiety about their disease, worse at night, then they present with this specific anxiety, and this points towards arsenic album as a potential remedy. ये रूल एक स्ट्रॉन्ग सिम्टम से केस की कंप्लीट अंडरस्टैंडिंग तक पहुंचने की प्रोसेस को फॉर्मलाइज करता है। यहां इनिशियल सिम्टम जैसे कि ए सिर्फ एक सिम्टम नहीं होता, बल्कि ऐसा सिम्टम होता है जो किसी स्पेसिफिक रेमेडी जैसे कि बी की तरफ इशारा करता है। एब्जॉर्प्शन रूल को अप्लाई करके हम ये लॉजिक देते हैं कि अगर सिम्टम ए प्रेजेंट है और वो रेमेडी बी को इंडिकेट करता है, तो सिम्टम ए की प्रेजेंस खुद ब खुद ही सिम्टम और उसके रेमेडी इंडिकेशन दोनों के आपस के रिलेशन को इंडिकेट करती है। इस तरह होम्योपैथिक रिसर्चर उस सिम्टम को अलग से देखने की बजाय पेशेंट के पूरे सिम्टम पिक्चर और रेमेडी पिक्चर के साथ इंटीग्रेट कर पाता है, यानी एक स्ट्रॉन्ग इंडिकेशन से हम केस की टोटलिटी तक पहुंचते हैं। It reminds the researcher that a symptom is never a symptom. It's a piece of evidence that, when properly understood, points towards a specific remedy and should be considered as a part of a larger whole. Now, seventh rule. Seventh rule is simplification. Here the condition is both A and B are true. And the conclusion will be is A is true. इस रूल का कॉन्सेप्ट बहुत ही सिंपल है। अगर हमें पता है कि दो बातें एक साथ ट्रू हैं, तो हम उनमें से किसी एक बात को अलग से भी ट्रू मान सकते हैं। दूसरे शब्दों में, अगर एक कंबाइंड स्टेटमेंट सच है, तो उसके हर इंडिविजुअल पार्ट को भी इंडिपेंडेंटली सच माना जा सकता है। This rule allows us to break down a complex or combined statement into simpler constituent parts and consider each part individually. इससे रीजनिंग और एनालिसिस दोनों ज्यादा आसान हो जाते हैं। Let us understand the rule of simplification with a homeopathic example. Suppose that during case taking, the homeopathic researcher observes two important symptoms in the patient. The patient has a strong fear of being alone in the dark, and the patient experiences a sudden rush of heat to the face during anxiety. Together, these form the combined premise that A and B are both true. Now, by applying the rule of simplification, we are logically entitled to focus on either one of these symptoms individually. So we conclude, therefore, the patient has a strong fear of being alone in the dark. What does this mean in clinical research? By using simplification, the homeopathic researcher temporarily isolates the symptom of fear of being alone in the dark and gives it special attention. Although the sudden rush of it to the face may be found in several remedies such as belladonna or ferrum, the peculiar fear of darkness and solitude is a much more characteristic symptom. The homeopathic researcher then takes this isolated symptom to the repertory, where it immediately narrows the search to a small number of remedies, with stramonium becoming one of the strongest possibilities. Finally, the homeopathic researcher does not prescribe on this single symptom alone. Instead, the full symptom totality is reviewed once again to confirm the stramonium matches the entire case before making the final prescription. In this way, the rule of simplification helps the homeopathic researcher break down a complex symptom picture into individual components, identify the most characteristic symptom, and use it to guide the process of remedy selection. We must keep it in our mind that isolating that single symptom via simplification would lead to hundreds of possible remedies. Therefore, the homeopathic researcher uses simplification to generate a hypothesis, but must immediately return to the full conjunction, that is the totality, to confirm the final prescription. Now, the eighth of the nine rules of inference is conjunction. Importantly, this rule is the logical inverse of the seventh rule, simplification that we just covered. While simplification breaks a compound statement down into its parts, conjunction builds parts up into a compound statement. Here condition 1 is A is true. So conclusion is, therefore both A and B are true. होम्योपैथी का पूरा सिस्टम टोटलिटी ऑफ सिम्टम्स के प्रिंसिपल पर बेस्ड है। इसका मतलब है कि कोई भी एक सिम्टम अपने आप में पूरे केस को रिप्रेजेंट नहीं करता। एक सही प्रिस्क्रिप्शन तभी पॉसिबल होती है जब पेशेंट के कई इंडिपेंडेंट सिम्टम्स को एक साथ जोड़कर देखा जाए। यहीं पर कंजंक्शन रूल का रोल आता है। रेपर्टाइजेशन की लॉजिकल फाउंडेशन इसी रूल पर टिकी हुई है। मान लीजिए होम्योपैथ पेशेंट के मेंटल स्फेयर से एक रूब्रिक लेता है, हम इसको ए मानते हैं, उसके साथ फिजिकल स्फेयर का एक रूब्रिक जोड़ता है, इसको बी मानते हैं, और फिर एक मोडालिटी भी इंक्लूड करता है, इसको सी मान लेते हैं। इन सब को कंबाइन करके वो एक हाईली स्पेसिफिक सिम्टम कॉम्प्लेक्स बनाता है, यानी ऑल ए बी सी आर ट्रू। मतलब मेंटल स्फेयर, फिजिकल स्फेयर और मोडालिटी सब सही है। जितने ज्यादा ट्रू एंड कैरेक्टरिस्टिक सिम्टम्स हम लॉजिकली एक साथ कंबाइन करते हैं, उतनी ही आसानी से हम रेमेडी सिलेक्शन को नैरो डाउन कर सकते हैं और पेशेंट के लिए द ओनली सिमिलिमम रेमेडी तक पहुंच सकते हैं। इस तरह कंजंक्शन रूल हमें अलग अलग सिम्टम्स को एक मीनिंगफुल क्लिनिकल पिक्चर में कंबाइन करने में मदद करती है। इसी वजह से रेपर्टाइजेशन में कंजंक्शन एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट लॉजिकल टूल माना जाता है। अब इस कॉन्सेप्ट को और अच्छी तरह समझाने के लिए आइए एक क्लिनिकल एग्जांपल देखते हैं जहां कंजंक्शन रूल का प्रैक्टिकल एप्लीकेशन होता है। लेट अस अंडरस्टैंड द रूल ऑफ कंजंक्शन with a clinical example. During case taking, the homeopathic researcher makes two independent observations. The first observation is that the patient has a characteristic mental state of weepy sadness with a mild yielding disposition. This is our first premise A. The second observation is that the patient's physical complaints are much worse in a warm, stuffy room and are clearly relieved by open air and gentle walking. This is our second premise, that is B. Now, by applying the rule of conjunction, we combine these two true observations into a single statement. Therefore, the patient presents with weepy sadness and a yielding disposition together with marked relief from open air. This is A and B. What does this mean in clinical practice? If the homeopath considered only the mental symptoms, several remedies such as pulsatilla, natramur, ignitia, or sepia might appear suitable. Likewise, if only the physical modalities are considered, remedies such as pulsatilla, sulfur, or silicea might come into consideration. However, the homeopathic research does not prescribe on isolated symptoms. By applying the rule of conjunction, these independent observations are combined into one unified symptom picture, or the totality of symptoms. When both rubrics are repertorized together, the list of possible remedies becomes much smaller, and Pulsatilla nigricans emerges as the remedy that most closely matches the complete symptom picture. This example illustrates how conjunction helps the homeopathic researcher combine multiple independent symptoms into a single meaningful clinical totality, making the selection of the simillimum more precise and reliable. Let us now consider the ninth rule of inference, known as the rule of addition. This rule is very simple. It tells us that if one statement is true, we can logically form a new statement by joining it with any other statement using a word or. In symbolic form, premise is A and it is true. Therefore, either A or B is true. The reason this rule is valid is that if A is already true, then the statement either A or B is true must also be true, whether or not B is true. Say for example, premise A, the patient has a marked craving for salt. Therefore, the conclusion will be the patient either has a marked craving for salt or has a desire for sweets. In practice, the homeopath has not concluded that the patient desires sweets. That would be incorrect. The second statement, let it be B, is added without making any claim that it is actually true. Instead, the rule simply says that since the first statement is already true, the concluded statement, craving for salt or desire for sweets, is logically true. This illustrates the logical form of addition, although it does not by itself help in remedy selection. At first glance, addition seems purely academic and unhelpful in a clinical setting. Why would a homeopath ever want to add uncertainty or unrelated alternatives to a confirmed fact? In practice, addition is the logical foundation of the differential diagnosis and the expansive case-taking mindset. Let us understand the rule of addition with a homeopathic example. Suppose that during case-taking, the homeopathic researcher observes one confirmed symptom, that is, the patient experiences an intense sudden panic with the fear of death immediately after a shock. This is our premise A. By applying the rule of addition, we can broaden our thinking and say, therefore, the patient has sudden panic and fear of death. This symptom picture may indicate aconite napellus, or it may indicate arsenic album, or it may indicate opium. Here, imagine a junior homeopath who hears only the symptom sudden panic after a shock and immediately prescribes aconite napellus. That may be immature. The rule of addition reminds us that one confirmed symptom does not necessarily point to only one remedy. The same symptom may also be found in other remedies such as arsenic album, which is characterized by fear of death accompanied by marked restlessness and anxiety, or opium, where fear may be associated with shock, insensibility, or stupor. Therefore, instead of making an immediate prescription, the homeopath keeps all these remedies under consideration and asks additional questions. Is the patient restless or motionless? Is there excessive thirst? Is the skin hot or cold? What other characteristic symptoms are present? Once these additional symptoms are collected, the homeopath applies the rule of conjunction, that is rule number 8, by combining all the confirmed findings into a complete symptom picture. This process gradually narrows the list of possible remedies until the single simillimum can be identified. Thus, the rule of addition encourages the homeopathic researcher to keep an open mind at the beginning of the case analysis, rather than jumping to conclusions based on a single symptom. It broadens the field of possible remedies. The final prescription is then made only after additional characteristic symptoms have been gathered and logically combined. So, now summary of all 9 rules in a homeopathic workflow. To bring it all together, here is how a homeopathic researcher uses the entire set of 9 rules in a single consultation. See, first, modus ponens tells us if a patient has this totality, then they need this remedy. The patient has this totality, therefore they need this remedy. It also validates that higher dilutions cures because it contains biologically active memory of its crude form. We have discussed it in last lecture, right? Second, modus tollens guides us if this remedy was correct, the patient would improve. They did not improve. Therefore, the remedy was wrong. Third, hypothetical syllogism, also known as chain argument, helps in explaining if a crude substance produces a specific set of symptoms in a healthy prover, then that substance will cure a sick person presenting with those exact same symptoms. Fourth, after a cure, disjunctive syllogism explains the possibility of simillimum medicine present in the unlabeled bottle. Fifth, constructive dilemma helps us to understand if soric, then sulfur, if psychotic, then thuja. They are either soric or psychotic. Therefore, they need sulfur or thuja. Sixth, absorption guides us to understand if A is the patient that has this peculiar dread of loneliness, then they need B, that is stramonium. Therefore, if they have A, then they have B and need stramonium. Seventh, in simplification, suppose the patient has restlessness and fear of death. Therefore, isolating just the fear of death helps us look it up in the repertory. Eighth, conjunction. It tells us about the patient has fear of death and intense thirst for cold water. Therefore, he has both fear of death and intense thirst for cold water, which uniquely points to aconitum. Ninth, addition indicates that the patient has swollen red tonsils. Therefore, they have swollen red tonsils or belladonna or mercurius, keeping our differential diagnosis safely broad until we use conjunction to narrow it down. Next lecture will be part 3 of this chapter. We will cover rest of the logical techniques there. So thank you very much. Thank you.